Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia on Comcast Channel 66 and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Kendra Brooks as she discusses her recent legislative efforts and her spring plans. Lance Haver will tell us about the Tax Reform Commission, and we'll update you on how congressional Republicans' new budget plan will harm Philadelphians. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. So we did an interview yesterday with Councilmember Kendra Brooks, where we talk about the power legislation she introduced last week in City Council and about some of her plans for the spring. So here is our interview with Councilmember Kendra Brooks. Councilmember Kendra Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So can you walk us through the Power Act legislation that you introduced in council last week?
Yes, so I'm really excited about the Power Act legislation. Some of the top line things, it prevents retaliation against workers who speak up against their abusive employers. The Power Act builds on decades of pro-worker legislation passed by our city council, and it makes it possible to enforce some of the labor laws, some of the existing labor laws. And we have a lot of support, I think over 20 unions, some pro-worker organizations, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Philly AFL-CIO, and the Philly Black Worker Project. We have 14 total school co-sponsors, which include Jim Harity, who's the chair of the Labor Committee, and Council President Johnson. So that's a veto-proof majority, which is amazing. And what we know is that the Power Act helps to protect Philadelphians against Trump's anti-worker, anti-immigrant agenda by strengthening our Department of Labor, which is huge. And the Power Act makes it possible for workers to receive their compensation for lost wages and other damages. And it also gives the Department of Labor the authority to conduct investigations, expedite cases of retaliations. And we created a bad actors list, which is a list of employers who repeatedly break the law. So that's like the overview of the.
So if a worker feels they've been mistreated in some way, what should they do?
They would have to file a complaint down with the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor will help them process the investigation moving forward.
Okay. And what are some of your other goals for the spring session?
Some of the other goals. This was one of the top lying goals that we had for this Department of Labor. Some of the other things will be continuing our work around the garden work that we started is still not completed. We're still trying to figure that out. There's still some pieces of legislation that need to still be put in place. Also, housing, we want to shore up some of the work we've done with the I'm sorry, I'm having a blank in my mind of the name of the legislation. The work we did with eviction diversion program. Over the last couple of months, we have been hosting conversations with landlords. You know, a lot of the landlord lobbyists saying that our legislation was too pro-tenant. So we did a series of conversations with landlords at every level, small, medium, large, corporate, to get feedback on existing eviction diversion program and rental assistance. So we're finalizing that report to be able to put out and work directly with our new permanent eviction diversion office to make sure that we're correcting the things that weren't correctly implemented in the previous iterations of eviction diversion. So those are some of the top things that my office is working on right in this moment. This is Black History Month, and then we're going into Women's History Month. So we'll be celebrating women in the movement that have just shown acts of services. So we have a group, we're honoring women from my community, women of Nicetown. We're honoring women around criminal justice movements, where some of them are mothers of formerly incarcerated folks in a movement they've done around decarcerate. And then we're also supporting women who are a part of community organizations and RCOs around housing development in the city. So that's some of the things we'll be working on through March and April for Women's History Month and Black History Month.
So it might be a little early for this question, but do you have an idea of how you're approaching the budget this year?
We're in the conversations with folks that we usually fund to get in front of the budget ahead of time. So I think we're going to kind of make sure that we're supporting the entities that we know will be impacted the most. I usually support PAFA, I think is the right pronunciation of that, which is a immigrant rights legislative organization, which is one of the projects that I support every year. We're going to continue to make sure we're having funding for schools, which is going to be huge because we know we expecting our list of school closures to be coming down the pike soon for the city of Philadelphia. So that's a focus of ours, making sure that, we're meeting the needs of every community, even with the school closures. And what does that look like? So we're going to be focusing on that. And then, really, I think for us, our focus is making sure that we're protecting our city against any anti-Trump agenda items that we have already invested in the past. And that's what made me mention PAFA, which is one of the groups that helps immigrant organizations. We're still working through our reproductive justice task force to make sure that women's rights and information and identity is protected here in Pennsylvania, where abortion is still legal. We want to make sure that we're protecting the rights of those women. So we'll continue to focus on that. We currently have a reproductive justice task force is moving forward. It's not necessarily a funding request, but it's definitely a legislative agenda item that we will continue to follow over the next over the next year. We're slated to meet.
You touched on the chaos that I would call it that's happening at the federal level. As a council member, how do you look at this, and how do you help the city prepare for what could be coming?
Oh, that's a great question. So in my council role, we have been trying to pay attention to all of the executive orders that came to us. My team was overwhelmed with the amount of data coming our way with the executive orders. So we're working in my other capacity as being a part of Working Families Party to have some folks look through the executive orders to figure out what protections we need to put in place to make sure that we're protecting folks here in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania. So in my other hat that I wear, I'm looking to find ways to protect folks. And I think that's what we can do is get in front. We have Project 2025. We have the executive orders. How can we kind of condense all those things down, compare it to the city charter and what we have in place to figure out how we can protect folks here in the city? There's so many layers of destruction coming from DC. I think the only way for us to get ahead of it is to kind of study the information is out there and create legislation to protect or codify legislation that's already existing here in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And I say Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, I ask for the information in both directions to make sure I'm supporting some of our state folks as well. Like my number one responsibility, I feel, as a municipally elected official is to protect our folks at every level.
All right, I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. And thank you, council member, for giving us some of your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's always a
Uh,
pleasure meeting with you too.
I guess my question for you is, in terms of the Power Act, you say that it has a veto-proof majority in terms of support. Are you concerned? Was a veto of this particular legislation a concern?
No, absolutely not. We had just overwhelming support. Keep in mind, our mayor was definitely a part and worked very closely with the Domestic Workers, National Domestic Workers Alliance prior to becoming the mayor. She's been a supporter of this, and I do not anticipate her not being a supporter moving on.
Okay.
But it's
Now,
never too much to have
that's true.
the
It's
protections.
it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and
Exactly.
not have it. Now, in terms of the Power Act itself and the people that you were working with on it, were were you hearing that there was like an uptick in people um getting harassed on their jobs or facing retaliation? Because we've had folks from the National Domestic Workers Alliance on the show, and some of the stories they've told us have been pretty gnarly, for want of a better way to put it.
Well, this is an ongoing issue. I don't know if it was an uptick, but it has been consistent. And I'm speaking, I was a domestic worker, so I'm very privy to some of the horrific things that can happen to folks. So I think we're coming from the standpoint, let's not wait for it to get worse. Let's make sure we have legislation in place to, push people to do better and to make sure that workers feel protected here in Philadelphia, regardless what type of work you do. I think, the fact that a lot of our domestic workers are women, some of them are non-English speaking, and we put them at risk when there aren't laws on the books to protect them and the work that they do. So I'm really excited to be championing this, and I'm proud to say that I've been a part of this movement for many years, even prior to being an elected official.
Now, you mentioned the fact that they're looking at possible school closings. And a lot of that is a function of funding or the lack thereof. And we've also talked a little bit about how the Trump administration and what it might do in terms of budget cuts might impact Philadelphia. Now, traditionally, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania hasn't been all that kind to Philadelphia either from a funding standpoint. They still don't have anything in place to address the Commonwealth Court decision that says that they need to fund all schools equally, because everybody kind of knows that the proposal that Governor Shapiro put up, they're going to fight it tooth and nail. Does the city have funds of its own that it can, that it can use to kind of offset some of this stuff? And has the city ever considered, and I guess that I'm probably the only person that has considered this, but has the city considered maybe keeping its own money in terms of taxes?
Wow. I don't know if that has not been a conversation that has come up in my office. So I'm not really sure, as a city, ever considered that. That would not be my expertise, but I do realize that, our current council body, will go out of our way to protect schools. And we're not really sure what funding is going to look like at all levels to determine what we need to do as a city to protect Philadelphia public schools. Yeah, we're in interesting times right now.
Are you surprised that they're talking about closing more schools? Because they closed a lot of schools the last time around.
No, definitely not surprised. School closures has been an ongoing conversation in the city of Philadelphia for what, 20 years now? I don't think we have consistently closed schools uh, over the last 10 years or more on a regular. So I'm not surprised, with poor building conditions, uh, shifts in population around the city. I mean, we have to have these conversations to figure out where we need to open up more seats and take in consideration areas that have low enrollment. But we definitely need to make sure that we have more than enough educational slots available for all children in Philadelphia near their home without, huge commutes. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I haven't received a list yet to be able to, you know, effectively speak on school, why certain schools or why not. Uh, but it's definitely going to be a part of the conversation that we have over the next couple of months as we wait for the list to come out.
Now, in terms of your own personal process to figure out what you're going to do in terms of and what your asks are going to be in terms of the budget, you said there's things that you always support, but when do you start your process and what do you take into consideration when you start that process?
Oh, that's a great question. So we have, I think we met about this. I have this plan for Philly families, which is my vision for my time in office. And it's set up into 5 different pillars. And within those pillars, there are projects and legislation that I intend on working on over the next 3 years now, because I'm already into the term. And it's like regular bread and butter. Workers' rights is always going to be number one. Housing, how we can make sure we have enough housing stock for low income, working class folks here in the city. Education, housing, worker rights. That's why we're doing this. Office of Labor Protection, it needs to be fully funded and make sure that there are folks in the office to be able to support these claims as they come. Those are issues that I continue to fight for and be on the front line with. But, with this current administration, we don't know what's coming down the pike that might, for lack of better words, trump some of the issues that, have traditionally been like bread and butter issues for me in the past. I don't know what kind of provisions or concessions I'm going to have to make sure that we're protecting Philadelphians. But for me, my guide for Philly families is the roadmap, and that's what we use to make the determination as to what will our budget ask look like and what are our budgetary priorities for the next year.
Okay, I have one last question. You are the current minority leader.
Yes.
And being the minority leader in council looks a lot different than it has traditionally in city council. What has that experience been like for you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I entered this role is not a roadmap, is no one to tell me what I'm supposed to do as the minority leader, or it's not even a playbook to say what are the expectations. But for me, I decided to use this role to kind of help streamline some of the work that some of the more progressive or left-leaning electeds are working on. Use our platform to connect with some of our also more progressive or left-leaning state reps, and continue to build this platform around working Philadelphians. Like I said, there's no playbook. No one even told. If I asked someone what I was supposed to do, no one could tell me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us, council member. You're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5, and here is Larry McGlynn, our co-host.
All right. Well, Minority Leader Brooks, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
All right. You too. All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Brooks for joining us, Minority Leader Brooks, excuse me, for joining us on the show and sharing her views with us. And now I'd like to bring on Lance Haver to tell us a little bit about what's going on with the Tax Reform Commission.
Good evening, Larry. Good evening, Denise.
evening.
Before I start talking about tax review, I just want to tell you I got a tip that in 2 weeks, the water department's going to file for a very large rate increase. And they're going to use the same hearing judge and the same advocate. So the fix is in, pretty clear that they intend to ram this through our throats. no changes, no combination of work with PGW and the water department. So something I will continue to inform our readers about. I will write about it next week, but I think that today I tried to get a copy of the contract that the Water Rate Board gives the advocate and uses to hire the hearing examiner, the administrative law judge. And they told me that it's not posted anyplace. I have to file a right to know.
Now, when you say a large rate increase, how large are we talking?
So I don't know yet, but I believe it's going to be around 23%.
Wow,
right.
That's pretty large.
Right. But here's the game, right? They're going to ask for 23%. They're going to pay the advocate $500,000 to $1 million. They're going to bring it down to 19%. The advocate's going to take that money, put it in their pocket and say, see, if it weren't for me, they would be getting 23%. They're only getting 19%. And of course, water is just a basic necessity of life. It's not like you can decide, hey, this year I'm not going to Europe. Instead, I'll go down to Jersey Shore. You can't say, well, this year I'm not buying water from Europe. I'm going to buy it from the Jersey Shore. Water is something that you can't be without. In fact, unfortunately, families who have their water cut off have their children taken away from them because the house is not habitable without water. So I will continue to report on that and make sure that I attend all of the board meetings. The board did try and meet today, but I guess because of the snow, no one was able to show up. Kind of sad situation there. But I was talking about the tax commission, and I wanted to talk a little bit about who it is, what it does, and the situation that we're in. So I do have a slideshow, but I'm going to stop in between all the slides and talk to Denise and Larry to try and make the connection between what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what's happening in Philadelphia. So if I could just call up the slideshow, thanks. So the Tax Review Commission was created by legislation years ago. And every so often, City Council and the new mayor call it back into session. And it's supposed to be charged with comprehensively analyzing Philadelphia's tax structure and making recommendations for reforms to make the tax structure more inclusive, more equitable, and more growth-oriented. But here's the problem. There are 15 members of the commission. 9 are appointed by elected officials who have to rely upon campaign donations to get reelected. 6 come from each of the local chambers of commerce. 0 come from municipal workers' unions. 0 come from the teachers' union. And 0 comes from neighborhood groups. So that in and of itself already tells you what the thrust of the work's going to be. If you put billionaires as co-chair of the commission, if you put businesses to control the commission, if you have almost all the people on the commission being exceedingly wealthy, it's hard not to think of this as already decided what's going to happen. So let me go on and talk a little bit more about what we now know. So, and again, full disclosure, I am a member of what's called the advisory committee. I was asked to give my advice to the Tax Review Commission and to talk about, from my perspective, what they should do. I will tell you that in my experience going to these meetings, it doesn't really matter what I say. I'd probably have a better response if I stood on my head in the corner and spit nickels, as the expression goes. So here's what the Inquirer said. And by the way, I did get a request from the Tax Review Commission that I not write about any of this until they release the study. The study hasn't been released, but the Tax Review Commission decided to talk to the Philadelphia Inquirer 3 days ago to try and get their way of thinking about it out there before I wrote about it or before anyone else wrote about it. So this is from the Philadelphia Inquirer story. Again, a good reporter. I'm not suggesting anything else. But he says, quote, many City Hall observers expect them, and the sentence them means the tax commission, to recommend a massive cut or elimination of the net profits tax. Now, it is true the business taxes are very confusing. There are many of them. There's parking tax, there are beverage taxes, there are liquor by the drink taxes, there um, net profits tax, there's gross receipts tax, there's use and occupancy tax, and it is somewhat confusing to figure out what's going on. And the reason for this is every time we try and figure out, we as a city try and figure out how do we raise the money we need to continue to operate, we add a tax as opposed to redoing it. So this, every few years, they bring the commission together and say, well, let's think about it organically or systemically. But if we see they've already leaked to the Inquirer that what they're going to do is try and eliminate all the taxes. And here's really where it gets very confusing. What the Tax Review Commission and what its supporters in City Council are doing is exactly what we're going to be talking about next. It is exactly the same as the Trump tax policy. They're claiming that if they give money to the wealthy, to corporations, it'll trickle down to poor and working people. There is no room, no space between what President Trump is saying he will do, which is being attacked by Philadelphia City Council. We just heard a council person talking about having to defend the city against the Trump tax cuts. But it's the same exact tax plan that city council members are advocating for, that the tax commission's recommending. And much like President Trump, the co-chair of the tax commission, Richard Vague, has said it's going to be renamed when they release it as a job creation report. They're saying that they're going to create 30 to 40,000 jobs as a result of these tax cuts. And they base that on a consultant they hired who they told to run the numbers. So that's kind of the situation we're in. Let me pause there and just talk a little bit about what's going on.
But this is the same thing we hear all the time. We've been hearing this for 40 years. As long as I've been alive, we've been hearing this. Cut taxes, businesses can grow. When has that ever happened?
Well, that is an interesting point because it has never happened. And it's not just me saying that. There's been study after study after study that shows that these tax cuts do two things. They make the rich richer, and they make poor and working people worse off. And, whether you go to the Roosevelt Institute, which, is named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who gave us the safety net, who gave us Social Security, gave us Medicaid, gave us Medicare, and really created a whole network of safety nets and ways of helping working people. But they're not the only ones who are saying this. We can look at what's happened economically to the middle class. Now, those people who are as old as I am remember a time growing up when average workers go to work, be able to buy a home on one salary. And then as that started eroding, some women wanted to go to work, wanted to join the workforce, wanted to have a job and not be set aside or pushed in a corner. But while that choice was there in the beginning, once women started entering the workforce, the tax cuts created a situation where now many women don't have a choice. Many families rely upon two incomes to be able to keep a roof over their head, to pay the mortgage or pay the rent, put food on the table, get the car. And even that isn't working so well. So who else is saying this? Who else is saying that the wage increases haven't trickled down and the corporate executives are capturing 81% of the wage gains? So in the golden age of America's middle class, productivity was shared between the owners of the companies and the workers of the companies. Now that doesn't happen. When we switch to AI, what's going to end up happening is corporations will increase their profits and they'll lay off workers, and the workers that are there are not going to share in that wealth. So no one other than Forbes, which is a magazine for the wealthy, a magazine that dedicates itself to keeping track of who's winning at the game of accumulating the most wealth. And I want to read this because it's really kind of incredible. Forbes notes the combined net worth of America's richest 400 would rise to a staggering $4.5 trillion, making them nearly 50 times better off than their 1982 counterparts, far outpacing the consumer prices index, near tripling. So while the average person has seen their income go up 3 times, the wealthy have seen it go up 50 times. Now, again, this isn't from a Roosevelt Institute. This isn't from a left-leaning think tank. This is Forbes magazine stating the obvious, that if you give money to the rich people don't have to share it and often don't. There is a Will Rogers quote, which goes like this. He said, we ought to really give money to the poor people. The rich people will end up with it, but at least it'll go through the hands of the poor people before the rich people get it. So that's the situation. I want to talk a little bit about what people may not know. And this comes from the Pew Charitable Trust study. Now, again, Pew is not a left-leaning institution. Pew has an endowment from oil companies. And what they did is they took 2 years to look at the taxes in Philadelphia. And here's what they found out. 75% of Philadelphia's small businesses pay no business taxes whatsoever. There's a $100,000 exemption. So 75% don't pay anything. Of the 25% who do, the average tax bill is $1,315. Now, I think most of us know that we want to create jobs. We want to help small businesses start up. And Philadelphia has actually got a great program called Jumpstart Philly. Jumpstart Philly exempts startup businesses that hire a few workers from all business taxes for 2 years. But here's the problem. The Commerce Department and the Chamber of Commerce's don't tell small businesses about it. Now, again, to start a business in Philadelphia, you have to get a business privilege license. You would think that when you applied for that, the Commerce Department would want you to know about this Jumpstart Philly, would be bragging about it in the same way you'd think that the city would brag about the homestead exemption and tell new homeowners, hey, you just bought a home in Philadelphia. We'd really like you to stay here, raise your family here. We want to let you know what we're doing to help you. Here's a program, the homestead exemption, which you could qualify for regardless of your income. But we don't do that to homeowners. We don't notify them. In fact, often people who should be getting the homestead exemption aren't getting it. And we know, according to the Pew study, that there are over 2,000 businesses, 2,000 small businesses that should not be paying any taxes that have been. So all the discussion about lowering business taxes as being the be-all and end-all are undercut by the fact that there are 2,000 startup businesses in the city of Philadelphia who paid taxes that they didn't have to pay. So where does all this information come from? Why does the Tax Commission believe that the only thing that matters to businesses is business taxes, not insurance costs, not the cleanliness of the city, not public service, not SEPTA? The only thing that matters, according to the Tax Review Commission, in terms of creating jobs, is business taxes. And again, no secret, it's because of who's on the commission. As we said, majority of the commission are billionaires or represent the chambers of commerce or very wealthy people. And who did they ask? They didn't ask people who are leaving the city. Now, we know we have a population issue. People are leaving the city. Sometimes people leave the city because they've been gentrified. They've been pushed out of their neighborhood. Sometimes people leave the city because they lose faith in our school system. Sometimes people leave the city because they can't find a place to park and they get tired of driving around trying to figure it out. Sometimes people leave the city because they think there's a better opportunity for them elsewhere. I can't say why most people leave the city. I have not had the resources to conduct a study. The Tax Review Commission did have the resources to do that. They could have easily done, sometimes it gets called an exit survey, right? It's a polite way of saying we're going to fire you and now we're going to give you an exit interview. We're going to tell you why we fired you. But we could have asked, why is it that you're leaving the city? And Denise and Larry, why do you think most people leave the city?
I would say crime.
There is a
Crime or schools is what I would say.
now there is a politically correct answer I could give and a non-politically correct answer I could give. And I'll be nice and do the politically correct one. A lot of people leave due to, well, gentrification plays a part in it. But if you spend any time at all on Twitter, which because I'm a masochist, I do a lot, you see that a lot of people have left Philadelphia because the Philadelphia that they knew growing up as a kid in the Northeast no longer exists.
Right. There are many reasons, and those are as valid as any. I personally know people who have left. Now, again, it's no secret I'm a transplant. I didn't grow up here. I grew up, as I like to say, a little bit left of nowhere. And I love cities. You know, when I came here, there were many bookstores, maybe many movie theaters. The internet has changed some of that. So now if you live nowhere, you can still access good books and there's still things that you can do. But density gives us different foods, different art, different films, different bookstores. All those things can't exist without the density of city life. So I am someone who really enjoys that because when I was growing up, it didn't exist for me. I like to point out where I grew up, there's one movie theater that played a movie one weekend all week and the next weekend. So if you had a steady date, you can only go to the movies once a week. Couldn't go both weekends. Had to find something else to do. But that being said, I know people who have left the city. I don't know anyone who said, I'm leaving the city because the business taxes are too high. I don't know anyone who's leaving the city who says the wage tax is too high. I do know people who said, I can't afford to keep up with the rising real estate taxes. I do know families who have left the city because they were concerned about how their child was going to be educated. Why there's this belief that the reason why people are leaving the city is based on few different mills, which is 1/1000th of 1%, is unknown to me. But if all you do is ask wealthy people and ask businesses why they're leaving the city, you're going to get a different answer than if you ask young children. Now, the significance of this is really very apparent to me. And that is the more people living in the city, the more people buying things in the city, the more demand there are for stores, the higher the tax revenues, all of the things that go along with people wanting to move into a city that help the city out in some ways are much more important. You know, one of the questions is, why would a business locate in Philadelphia if Philadelphia is so awful? And when you talk to people who run these businesses, one of the things they say is, well, this is where the high-tech workers are. These are the people who we want to hire. They want to live in the city. They want to walk to work. They want to be part of a vibrant life, restaurants, bars. Again, you may not enjoy that, but many people do. And so that's why if a business wants to recruit that level of worker, they don't want to be in Iowa. They don't want to be in Des Moines. They don't want to be in Duluth, Minnesota. They want to be in Philadelphia, in Boston, San Francisco, New York, DC. No offense to Chris, maybe Baltimore, maybe not. But they want to be someplace where there's a vibrant social life, artistic life, where they can enrich themselves while they're living. So we didn't ask any of that. Tax Review Commission didn't ask any of them. They didn't interview any teachers. They didn't interview any RCOs. They didn't interview any municipal workers. Now, I should be clear about this. If they did, they haven't talked about it. All I can report on is what they say. And what they say is, we met with business owners and they all told us the problem is the business taxes. It's kind of like asking people who are lumberjacks, should we let you cut down all the trees? I mean, What's the answer? Yeah, of course. It's a real problem when all you do is ask people who are struggling with it. Or the better example often given is if you give somebody a hammer, almost everything looks like a nail. So that's kind of how the Tax Review Commission purposely limited the answers that they wanted to get. But here's the thing. Richard Vague, who's a billionaire, who has made over $200,000 in campaign contributions, who's one of the chief funders of this group called 3.0, which is a political action committee that supports a number of city council people. He has written a number of books. Here's a direct quote from his webpage. I didn't even have to read his book. From his webpage, those who champion the trickle-down theory of economics are correct, except for one detail. It is debt that has been trickling down, not wealth. So here you have the chairman, the co-chair of the Tax Review Commission saying trickle-down doesn't work. And yet that's what he's recommending. Now, it would be nice if he disclosed how much richer he'll be if he has to pay less taxes or his business has to pay less taxes. I don't know the answer to that. I will say I don't really know personally billionaires, so I really don't know what their lives are like. It is hard for me to conceive that after the first billion, you still want more. But, you know, again, it's pretty clear that some people do. All you have to do is look at Elon Musk, and he will do anything he can to continue to add to the billions that he has. What does he do with it? I'm not sure, but that's where it is. So are there better options? Well, I'm part of an advisory committee that says, of course, there are better options. One, there can be targeted tax cuts. We can do many things to help small businesses because small businesses create wealth. They're the backbone of employment. It gives people an opportunity to get on the ladder as a success. You know, when we bring in a big corporation, that money goes to the stockholders and leaves our area. When we open up a small business, that money recirculates in our economy. We can require the city to buy locally. When the city puts out a contract, we can say, instead of using prison labor to build park benches, or instead of going overseas to buy paper, you have to buy it from a company here in Philadelphia. We can do that. We can say, as I said in city council, we can say every contract that we give has to go to a company that has profit sharing or is worker owned, so the money continues to grow here in Philadelphia. It's not a secret that there are much better economic models to build the middle class than trickle-down economics. The problem is when you have people who give literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions, and you have them controlling the discussion, and you have them giving them the permission to rename the Tax Review Commission the Job Creation Commission, that it becomes almost impossible for elected officials who need that money, who have to run, to be able to reject this and say, we're not going to do it. And I want to just make one more point and then kind of talk a little bit and then switch to the federal government. The concept of trickle-down strategy is based on a lie. Proponents of trickle-down say, if you give tax breaks to the businesses and the wealthy, they'll give it to workers and hire the unemployed. That's simply a misunderstanding of a business's role in our economic system. For those of us who have been afforded a quality education, some of us have read A.A. Burley, who was Delano Roosevelt, FDR's brain trust. And he writes, let's look at the roles of businesses in our society. They're not social service agencies. We don't have businesses to take care of the poor. We don't have businesses to house the homeless. We don't have businesses to clothe the clothesless. That's not their role. Business has one mission and one mission alone, and that is to make money for their investors and their owners. Now, I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. That is an honorable thing to do. There is nothing wrong with people getting together and saying, I think I can make something that other people want, and I can make a livelihood out of it for myself and my friends and my family. But that is the role. In fact, if a business took its money and didn't use it to try and make a profit, its shareholders would sue. there'd be a shareholder lawsuit saying the management is not doing what the management by law must do. So businesses only hire more workers when an additional worker will increase their profit. And they only pay workers more when they have to retain the workers or believe that there's competition out there and they don't want the workers looking for other jobs. The trickle-down theory is based on the idea that businesses get more money and give it to the workers or hire the unemployed without having a reason to do it. Now, why that sells so well is because we give so much permission for people like the Cato Institute and these very right-wing libertarian think tanks to try and do away with all of the safety net. And that is the segue into what's happening in Washington, because while I'm saying this is wrong, and we all know it's wrong, and it's incredibly upsetting to see quote unquote liberal Democrats supporting Trump's tax plan, it's even worse in Washington. And I know, Larry, you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Lance. And that's the thing that drives me insane about this. When we talk about cutting business taxes, what the businesses do is they buy back stock and they give their CEOs bonuses. That's where that money goes. That's where the emergency money during the financial crisis ended up going in a lot of ways. I don't know how many different times we can say that people can say the same thing and it has the opposite result of what they tell us. And then they just say, no, it'll work. It's working. It'll work. It just never works. And that's what we're seeing on the national level. And part of what we have to do on this show now is talk about what's happening on the national level, because it is going to have more and more impact as to what happens here in Philadelphia. And just today, and it's unfortunately a perfect segue off what Lance was talking about, the Congressional Republican Ways and Means Committee released what they want to do with the budget this year and for the next 10 years. So they have a 10-year plan here, and they want to cut $4.5 trillion over 10 years from the federal budget. $4.5 trillion. Now, where is that coming from? And they're just going to tell you this. They just admitted this. They want to do $2 trillion in deficit reduction and of mandatory spending. And what is mandatory spending? Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP benefits, plus other things, and that's social safety net we've been talking about. That's what they want to do. Trillions of dollars. And what are they going to do with those savings? Tax cuts for businesses and wealthy people. Again, with this idea that if we cut taxes, the benevolent business owners will hire more people, and more people will have jobs. And again, it's never worked. So I want to go through this bill a little bit. I haven't had time to really study it because it just came out today, but I highlighted a few things, and I really want to focus on a couple of things here. So in this resolution, they talk about where they're going to specifically cut money over the next 10 years. First thing on the list, Committee of Agriculture, $230 billion over the next 10 years. What comes through the Committee of Agriculture? SNAP benefits.
And also, Larry, that's going to affect farmers.
Yes, it already is.
That's going to affect farmers a lot, because the United States control, while we grow a lot of stuff, we also get rid of a lot of stuff that has grown, and we pay farmers to either not grow things or to destroy these things, which has never made sense to me.
No.
But the reason why I brought up farmers is, and you're going to see a lot of this type of reporting as these cuts and different things comes out. Farmers were some of the biggest supporters of Donald Trump. And there's a saying on the internet about leopards eating faces. Like somebody goes out, they buy a leopard, and they're like, oh, it's a leopard. It's a baby leopard. Eventually the leopard grows up, and leopard, they're like, oh, the leopard will eat someone's face, but the leopard won't eat my face because I raised the leopard. And what ends up happening is they get their face eaten by the leopard because a leopard is going to leopard. And that's kind of what's happening here.
Yep.
A lot of the people that you're mentioning, the people on Medicaid, the people on Medicare, the people who are getting SNAP benefits, the farmers, a lot of these people hitch their wagon to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And they're about to get the nastiest lesson in American history of how elections have consequences.
And not only that, but USAID, which has been unilaterally shut down by President Elon Musk. They buy a lot of money, or buy a lot of crops from farmers that they send overseas.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing that anymore.
So for me, there's a few points about SNAP, the old food stamp, what we used to call food stamps. Mm-hmm. As Denise says, farmers are really going to suffer. But the independent grocery stores, again, if you grow up in a rural area, there may only be one supermarket within 30 miles. And sometimes there was called an IGA, an independent grocer, a member of the Independent Grocers Association. Without food stamps in these rural areas, those supermarkets are going to fold. Yeah. And even if you're doing all right, that means you're going to have to travel 40 minutes to get to a supermarket. Second thing that's going to happen is the community hospitals, like where I went when I was a kid. You break your leg, you go to those community hospitals. It's half an hour away. Maybe they have an x-ray machine, maybe they don't, but it's a local hospital. They all rely upon Medicaid and Medicare to pay their bonds and keep their heads above water. They're all struggling now. Some of them will fail. And what this means, unfortunately, is if you have a heart attack or you have a stroke, there's no hospital within 45 minutes of you. And it is, again, unfortunately, a death sentence. Those of us who live in cities, like I live in South Philly. If something unfortunate happens to me, I'm within 12 minutes of getting to an emergency room. Where I grew up, if that local hospital closed, the next hospital is literally an hour away. And that's assuming that there's a volunteer ambulance that's going to come get me, which, they're volunteers. Hopefully they will, but, it's a little different. So health is a problem. Supermarkets are a problem. What I'm kind of curious about is what's going to happen to all of Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s supporter who are going to make America healthy again by eating good food. Is he really going to be silent about this? Is he really going to say people don't need health care? They don't need quality food. They don't need SNAP to help them?
I could answer that question for you, Lance, because I watched his confirmation hearing. That's exactly what he'll say. That's exactly what he'll say.
How does he do it?
The thing is, you don't have a conscience to be able to do that.
And it also helps. It also helps if you're the somewhat batty, wealthy scion of a political dynasty. And what people make the joke that Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. I lived in the Alabama section of Pennsylvania. I've lived in the Twin Tiers area that's closer to upstate New York. And I've lived in Berks County and the coal regions. A lot of those places only have one hospital now. So that hospital has been hanging on a thread. So the point you made, Lance, was very salient in that a lot of these places are really going to get hurt by this. And in places like Mississippi, which I read about a lot because they have a great local news site called Mississippi Today that I recommend to everybody. In Mississippi, at least in Pennsylvania, we took the Affordable Care Act money. So that has helped a lot of rural hospitals stay afloat. Mississippi has not taken the Affordable Care Act money. And we don't even know if the Affordable Care Act money is going to be available for people to take with this administration. So in places like Mississippi, where there are already people dealing with the exact scenario that Lance was talking about, where you're an hour away from the nearest hospital and you had a stroke and you just may as well consider that a death sentence. That is already going on in Mississippi and has been for years. There are several places in that particular state that do not have a hospital within 2 hours of some towns. So, it's nice that they want to cut taxes for their friends. Okay, great. That's what you want to do. But it would really be a nice idea if you didn't cut them and put it on the backs of the very people who put you in this office in the first place.
That'd be great, but I'm going to keep going through a couple of these here. $330 billion from the Committee on Education and Workforce. So that's going to be not just education funding, but higher ed education, Pell Grants, things like that they've already said they want to cut. So there's the proof right there. Let me get to this other one here. Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, $10 billion over the course, about $1 billion a year.
And the Republicans on the SEPTA board are going to be silent about this.
Yes.
And it's just, I hate to keep going back to it, but I find it very upsetting to find how so many people lack a backbone to tell the truth. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
And here's what they say in the resolution. The free market, where individuals pursue their own self-interests, has been responsible for greater advancements in quality of life and generation of wealth than any other form of economic system. Federal policy designed to grow the economy should thus allow market forces to operate unhindered rather than pick winners and losers. That's getting rid of all regulation. That's what they mean there. And basically making everybody subject to what they call the free market, which is anything but. We know that. It's not just this magical thing that develops wealth for people. You put $1 in, you get $5 back at the end of the week. That's not how it works. The free market picks winners and losers all the time. The government is the only thing that stands in the way of people getting destroyed by the free market.
Well, that's kind of the whole idea. For decades now, the divide has been between, and this is the only way I can think to put this, the rich and the people who clean the bathrooms of the rich. And if you're not the rich, you already know what category you're in. Ronald Reagan, for all intents and purposes, did away with the middle class in the 80s. Yeah. It does not exist anymore.
So they want to reduce federal spending, expand American energy production, lower taxes that discourage work, savings, and investment.
Well,
you regulate the economy and enact reforms to diminish bureaucratic red tape. Deregulate the economy. Just come out and say it. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, things like that kept people from being screwed over by their banks. No, we don't want that. We need to deregulate. The last time they deregulated, we had almost a Great Depression in 2008.
Excuse me, Larry, I had read somewhere that they wanted to get rid of the FDIC. Is that included in that?
I haven't read that in here, and that would be absolutely insane if they did that. And here's the other thing. And we only have a minute left. I'm going to touch on this. And I've spoken both to Denise and Lance about this off the air in depth because I've always believed this. Here's what they say. The national debt poses a significant risk to the country's long-term fiscal sustainability with implications for future generations. I'm 42 years old. All I've been hearing about my life is the debt. You know what's happened negatively because of the debt in my lifetime? Nothing. It's imaginary. What are we even talking about here? Anyway, I'm sorry to end on a rant. I just had to get that out. We'll be back next week on Hall Monitor, complaining more about this and other things. Thank you very much.